Hello, and welcome to the Eppendorf Lab channel, your home for webinars and live demos presented by life science experts at Eppendorf. My name is Simon Plate, and I'm one of the marketing managers here at Eppendorf. We're streaming live from our headquarters in Hamburg, Germany, and this webinar is already the 5th episode of our Pipetting masterclass series, in which we share some of our liquid handling knowledge and try to give you some tips and tricks to improve your pipetting in the lab. We will hold a total of 7 Pipetting masterclass webinars, so make sure to check out the agenda for any upcoming topics and the past event section here in the Eppendorf Lab channel to see what you might have missed in the last 4 episodes. Today's topic is upgrading to lab automation, why and when to consider it, and we'll take a closer look at pipetting robots. In the next 30 minutes, we'll cover the following points. We'll share our view on general benefits of lab automation. Then we'll take a closer look at liquid handling workflows to see where the use of pipetting robots might be beneficial. And we are going to find out if automation can also support low throughput applications. Now I'm happy to welcome today's expert and presenter, Dr. Jessica Wagner. Jessica holds a PhD with a focus on reproductive biology from the medical school in Essen here in Germany. She joined Eppendorf as application specialist 10 years ago with a focus on cell handling and workflows, and is now also responsible for automated liquid handling trainings and applicative support. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Simon, and hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today.
Before I let Jessica start with her presentation, though, I'd like to take a very short moment to highlight our question tool that you'll find directly below this live feed. Just use the form field to send us your questions or comments regarding the webinar. And after Jessica's presentation, we will have a Q&A segment. You will notice that we are also asking for an email address there. That's just to get in touch with you later in case we cannot answer your question as part of the webinar. But now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jessica. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Simon, for the introduction. And yes, so let's start with the presentation. Thank you again for joining us today. In the last episodes of this webinar series, we heard a lot about how to optimize manual pipetting with regards to the handling of different liquid types, the choice of pipetting tool, and the optimal pipetting technique. Today, we are talking about the benefits of automation and are looking into the applications and workflows where automated liquid handling platforms can support your daily work in the lab. So why automation? What are the true benefits of automating your workflow or even part of your workflow for that matter? First thing that probably comes to your mind when trying to answer that question might be throughput. With increasing sample throughput, the benefit of automation becomes quite obvious. The more pipetting steps a protocol or workflow contains, the more likely it is that errors occur when pipetting manually. Repetitive steps can become tedious with time, leading to decreased concentration of the operator and therefore increase the risk of introducing errors. As you may know, most workflows in the lab require you to handle different types of liquids. With manual pipetting, the largest source of error is actually due to the person holding the pipette in their hand. The operator accounts for 70% of the source of error with manual pipetting. Or the other factors listed, such as the actual pipette being used or the type of liquid being transferred, additionally contribute to variability with manual pipetting. So taken together, the automation of liquid handling steps is one way to counteract non-reproducibility of experimental data. So what are the major concerns when thinking about automation? What makes it so difficult to commit to an automation platform? Typically, one of the biggest concerns is the large learning curve. Your thought process may be, will I need to learn a new language? Will I need programming experience? I don't want to waste time learning something I will never use again. You probably start thinking about how much time you want to put into learning the software of a new automation platform. If it takes too long to use, you may think it's better to run a process by hand. Automation can be scary. Software bugs may come up that can make it difficult to recover from. It can also seem challenging to transition from manual processes to automation, not only when you think about liquid transfers, but also about the deck configuration, tip usage, and the details of all your pipetting steps, including volumes, air gaps, and flow rates. And there may be also concerns about how much lab space is needed for an automation platform. The size of such systems can differ greatly, but for sure, all of them need significantly more space than a handheld pipette. All these concerns are realistic, but depending on the automation platform you choose, they can be somewhat alleviated. So when considering automation, there are some questions that can be good to keep in mind, and these questions can be used as a framework to help you make an informed decision. So the first thing to consider is the sample throughput. So what is throughput, and will your throughput grow over time? Throughput can be the number of plates produced per week or the number of samples run in a day. Understanding your level of throughput will help to decide what kind of liquid handler best fits to your needs. The second thing to consider is the level of automation expertise in your lab. If your team doesn't include automation engineers or experts, your lab probably needs a very user-friendly software. Turnover is inevitable, making it very likely that at some point a new person will need to be trained on the system. Taking it a step further, how many people will be using the system? The more people that will be using the liquid handler in the lab means more methods that need to be written. So this means that it's extremely important to think about the usability of the software of the liquid handler you are considering. Another consideration when choosing an automated liquid handler is platform size. As I already mentioned, lab bench space is very important. So how much are you willing to give up? Does the system need any additional connections such as water, electricity, or air supply? Well, this means that you need to get in touch with facilities in order to get this liquid handler set up in your lab. The feasibility of accessing these additional connections may alter the liquid handler that is the best fit for you. The final consideration is deciding on how much of your process should and can be automated. Larger liquid handlers can typically automate all steps with additional device integration. But for example, is it a deal breaker for you to carry your sample plates to a thermocycler? Or does your lab really need that thermocycler integrated on the deck of the liquid handler? That is definitely something to think about. The level of integration and automation that your lab needs will influence your final automation decision. So let's have a look at some workflows in the lab. Besides increasing throughput with millions of samples, when does automation make sense? So here you see an example of a sequencing workflow, starting with a primary sample, including nucleic acid purification, library preparation, normalization, PCR, and so on. So all in all, a very long workflow with a lot of single steps. So let's look at the pipetting steps required for this workflow. So here you see we start here on the left-hand side with the normalization step. For 96 sample, it requires 192 pipetting steps and roughly 30 minutes of hands-on time. Of course, the hands-on time is user-dependent when it's done manually. For the qPCR, it's around 300 pipetting steps and 30 minutes with 48 samples. And for a standard PCR, it can be 50 to 300 pipetting steps, as indicated here on the right-hand side. The most pipetting steps are needed for the nucleic acid extraction with 500 steps, and the winner in this case, or in this workflow, is the library prep with up to 2,000 pipetting steps and up to 5 hours hands-on time. So the first thing that I think we can all agree on is that these two parts of the workflow, library prep and nucleic acid extraction, are the most tedious ones. But what about the other ones? What about normalization and PCR when it comes to automation? Does that make sense? Is it worth it? Besides hands-on time and high numbers of pipetting steps, working in the low microliter range can also be an issue. So here you see drops of blood with different volumes in the range of 0.3 up to 5 microliters. And when you see at the scale below the drops, it has always more or less the same size, although it differs so much in volume. Now think about the liquids that you usually handle in the lab. Most of them are transparent, right? And when you are doing a PCR, you have to get it right at least 96 times. So for PCR, the demands on precision are high because of the low volume. Okay, so let's look at normalization. When you do the normalization of samples manually, it is a very tedious and also error-prone procedure. You look at your spreadsheet, adjust the volume, and pipette. And you do that over and over again. Look, adjust, pipette, look, adjust, pipette. In contrast, the automated process is much simpler. You start the robot, import your spreadsheet, start the procedure, and then the robot does its job and you can do something else. So coming back to my workflow slide here, steps like normalization are very error-prone when done manually. So taken together, considering automation of workflows or even parts of a workflow will require some time upfront for establishing processes and optimizing protocols. But once you are ready to go, it gives you the time and freedom to do other things and thus increase your overall productivity in the lab. Okay, so that sounds all good, but does that really justify the costs? Because let's be honest, automation platforms are a serious investment for a lab. So here are different models of the EP Motion, which is the automation system from Eppendorf. The average prices of the small, medium, and let's say medium/large EP Motion is roughly between 25,000 and 80,000 euros. And when you look at other suppliers, they also offer much larger automation platforms, which are also much more expensive. No matter what platform you look at, there are always additional costs for accessories like pipette tips, plates, racks, and so on. Okay, so let's compare this to the costs of the workflow. We are looking again at the NGS workflow, starting with the extraction of nucleic acids. Considering we have 96 samples, the costs for nucleic acid extraction are around 200 euros, mainly for reagents. For the library prep, including quality control, the reagent costs, are roughly 5,500 euros. In addition, an upfront invest of roughly 30,000 euros for the respective instrumentation, like the tape station and qubit, is needed. For the sequencing, the running costs can be up to 50,000 euros, including reagents, flow cell, and software subscription. And for the sequencer itself, the costs can even go up to 1 million euros. And what about the costs for the samples themselves? The samples are a cost factor that is not so easy to calculate because it can differ greatly depending on the source and the kind of sample. So, for example, on the lower end of the cost range can be samples from cultured cells and bacteria, followed by different types of samples from patients, food, or the environment. Samples from lab animals or liquid biopsies will be less expensive than samples from the field and solid biopsies. And when we look at samples from tumors, pathogen materials, and very rare specimens, it is almost impossible to put a price tag on them. So, taken together, depending on the workflow you consider to automate and depending on the samples you are using, the costs for automation can be neglectable. Okay, so let's sum up what we have discussed so far. It makes sense to think about automation workflows when the throughput in your lab is increasing, in contrast to manual pipetting, which can be error-prone depending on the technique applied and the tool that is chosen. With automation, you always achieve high accuracy and precision of liquid transfer and thus achieve a higher level of reproducibility and standardization in your lab. In addition, software-assisted documentation assures data integrity. And last but not least, an automated liquid handling platform provides both sample and user protection during the workflow. When considering automation in your lab, a checklist like shown here can help to answer the most important question. Does the system fit my application needs and throughput? Is there enough space on the deck, and can it be increased when required? Is the range of volume sufficient, and is the system flexible enough for me? Size does matter. So the system you are choosing should match your lab space, and there should be access to all connections that are needed, like water, electricity, and so on. We also talked about the costs for automation and usability of software and hardware. So now that we have reviewed what questions to ask when choosing an automation platform, there are a few key topics that I think you should remember. First, the system should meet the needs of flexibility in terms of customization, such as the use of different accessories and applications. The software should allow you to adjust as needed. Additionally, if your lab requires full walk-away capabilities, the liquid handler should be able to integrate with devices such as thermocyclers, plate washers, and plate readers. Depending on the automation platform that you choose, there should be an appropriate level of application support and expertise from the supplier. Once you have all of your questions answered, you should feel comfortable on deciding what your automation platform should be for your lab. And this is already one of the last slides for today. So here you see the different models of the Eppendorf EP Motion, starting with a small semi-automated version, the EP Motion 96, which can be used for pipetting whole 96 well plates in 1 steps. And then we have our fully automated EP motions in different sizes and configurations, plus a broad range of different accessories that you can choose from. So depending on your requirements and applications, Eppendorf offers different solutions for automating or semi-automating your liquid handling tasks in the lab. Okay, and before we start the Q&A, here is an overview of the complete webinar series of our Pipetting Masterclass. So right now we are doing a little Christmas break and we'll be back on January 31st with the next webinar on best practices for automated liquid handlers. And as already mentioned by Simon, you can find all previous and upcoming webinars of this series on the Eppendorf Lab channel. So you can always come back to the Lab channel and watch the presentations you are interested in on demand. And with this, I'm handing over to you again, Simon, and I think we can start our Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation, Jessica. Now, as you just mentioned, it's time for your questions in the audience. So please continue to send us any question you might have for us via the form field directly below this live stream. Let's start with this question we received addressing the time frame. So how long does it typically take to get something automated in the lab?
Yes, thank you for that question. So I think this really depends on the automation platform that you choose, and of course also on the workflow that you want to automate. There is time that is needed for installation and service, and you need application time for training and protocol development. So really, this is where the usability of the software comes in. It's an important factor in automating your methods and how quickly and how easily that can be done. But it's really difficult to say a time frame here because it really depends on the chosen platform and on the applications.
Okay, thanks. You showed the EP Motion portfolio. Can you tell us what volume ranges the EP Motion robots can pipette?
Sure. So for the fully automated EP Motions, as I showed you, we have 3 different models. There are in total 4 different pipetting tools, single channel and multi-channel pipetting tools. And these tools span the range from 0.2 microliters all the way up to 1 ml. Oh, and for the semi-automated version, the EP Motion 96, there are 2 different models covering a volume range of 0.5 microliters up to 1 ml in total.
Okay, then we have a more specific question around applications. What applications do you recommend to automate?
automation is really suitable for a wide variety of applications, and typically these have repetitive and or time-consuming steps or require very high accuracy and precision and also better sample management. So next generation sequencing is a good example. You see a lot of automation in that kind of world because it tends to be a process that is very labor intensive and includes multiple repetitive steps with the beat cleanup step and so on. So yeah, so in general, whenever you have very repetitive or time-consuming steps in a workflow, it makes sense to think about automation.
Okay. Then we have a question here regarding accessories. What kind of accessories were you talking about when you mentioned them?
Accessories. So when I think about accessories, I think of not only the things that can be moved on and off of the deck. For example, the 96 plates magnet would be an accessory, or a tube rack, or a liquid reservoir rack. Or you can have things that are already part of the deck, like a mixer, a heater, or a shaker. Some platforms offer a little bit more things than that. For example, they offer integrated thermocycles on the deck or tip towers, things like that. So depending on what you want, there are some accessories that can be removed from the deck, and then there are accessories that are built into a deck. So that depends on the system that you're looking at, but those are the type of things that we consider accessories.
Thanks. As far as I can see, we have two more questions. One is regarding the accuracy. Is there still a chance of inaccuracy with automation?
In terms of the actual pipetting tool on the automation platform, it is important that you get it calibrated and serviced so that you know that you're basically getting accurate liquid transfers. Because usually the tool, whatever pipetting hat you might be using, are calibrated before they come to you, so they are accurate. And in terms of the software, you know, there you program like usual and type in the volumes that you want to transfer, so you shouldn't see any issues on the software side.
Okay, then we have a question for an application. Can you use a liquid handler for sterile sample dilution? Very specific.
So when I look at our fully automated EP motions, they are equipped with a UV light and a filter, but it is not a complete sterile surrounding like you have it. You don't have any active airflow inside like you have in a biosafety cabinet. When we talk about our smaller semi-automated devices, like the EP Motion 96, or there are also from devices from other suppliers, these usually can be easily placed and operated in a laminar flow hood, and there you can use that, of course, for sterile sample dilution.
Okay, so I think that's the questions. If I should have missed any questions, don't be afraid. So we will definitely take a look at all of the questions that we received. And if you still have questions, please continue to just add them to the question tool until the end of the hour. And we definitely go through all the questions that you send us afterwards and send you an answer via mail. You can also take a look at the show notes. So the little description we have below this live feed, where you might find further resources that are already of help. But for now, I would like to say thank you very much, Jessica. Great presentation and interesting discussion in the end. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining our webinar today.
Yeah, thanks again. And as Jessica already mentioned, please remember that we're doing a full series of webinars, and the next one will take place in January. And we will again focus on pipetting robots and show our EP motion systems in action. It will be streamed live on Tuesday, January 31st. Don't miss it. Goodbye, and see you next time in the Eppendorf Lab channel.